Imposter syndrome is the fear of being found out. And this is something that so many people experience, myself included, and this can often also affect those who are highly intelligent and actually very skilled at what they do. Here are some quotes from famous people who have suffered from imposter syndrome. First of all, Tom Hanks. He said that no matter what we've done, there comes a point where you think, how did I get here? When are they going to discover that I am in fact a fraud and take everything away from me? Lady Gaga. I still sometimes feel like I'm a loser kid in high school and I just have to pick myself up and tell myself that I'm a superstar every morning. And finally, Albert Einstein. He said, the exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. So hey, if it's good enough for Tom Hanks, Lady Gaga and Albert Einstein, then if you experience imposter syndrome, don't beat yourself up about it. So in this episode of the Stress Less Living podcast, we're going to take a look at the 5 main types of imposter syndrome and how you can deal with each of them. Hey there and welcome to the Stress Less Living podcast. My name is Stephen Burns and I've been a practicing coach, trainer and hypnotherapist for 25 years. Each week I'll share easily digestible bite-sized ideas that you can immediately put into practice so that you can live a more harmonious and balanced life. On this podcast you can expect mindset advice, strategies for dealing with big modern day problems like stress, overwhelm, burnout, perfectionism and procrastination, and also insights into tools like meditation and mindfulness. So if you're looking for the perfect antidote for the chaos of modern life, my friend, you are absolutely in the right place. So let's get started. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the 5 different types of imposter syndrome according to Dr. Valerie Young. So Dr. Valerie Young is one of the 4 most experts on imposter syndrome. And if you want to check out her book, I'd strongly recommend it. It's called The Secret Thoughts of Highly Successful Women. Believe it or not, I have actually read that book. So before we even get to that though, I want to highlight an important point with regards to this subject. And that is that imposter syndrome isn't actually a syndrome. In fact, the researchers who first coined the term, Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes, apparently hate the fact that it's now accepted widely as a syndrome. They believe it's more of an experience, it's a phenomena, a set of feelings and beliefs that we have about ourselves, our potential, and the world that we live in. So for the rest of this podcast, I'm not going to call it imposter syndrome. I'm going to reframe it and call it the imposter's experience. And I know it maybe sounds like I'm splitting hairs here or arguing over meaningless semantics, but I don't think I am. At the end of the day, language is one of the primary vehicles that we use to understand and shape our subjective experience. And when we label something, especially if we label it as a syndrome, then it becomes static inside our mind. It becomes something that we have rather than an active process that we are involved in. And when something is static like that, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to change. We start to see it as a disease, some sort of affliction that we've contracted. But when we talk about it as an experience, it becomes something that we can alter. We can shift it through our thinking, our behaviour, and the way that we relate to it. So let's take a look at these 5 different types. So type number 1 of the imposter's experience, according to Dr. Valerie Young, is the perfectionist. So a lot of people think that a perfectionist is someone who just has extremely high standards, and that's only half correct. A perfectionist does have high standards, sometimes exceptionally so, but they have also linked the achievement of those high standards with their self-worth. And this last piece is crucial. It's okay to have high standards. Of course it is. In fact, it's great. But you don't want to believe that you are some kind of worthless human being if you don't manage to achieve them, if you in some way fall short. So with perfectionists, they tend to end up in this kind of weird psychological bind where they believe that if they don't achieve these incredibly high standards, it means something fundamentally is wrong or bad about them, which isn't good, is it? So they often end up trying to control their environment. A lot of perfectionists are also control freaks. The control part is very much a coping strategy. And all of this is done because they have a fear that if they don't achieve those standards, then it will mean that they'll be exposed as some kind of fraud and simply not good enough. And for me, this is quite close to home. I'm definitely a recovering perfectionist and also a recovering control freak. And for me, the big transformation happened when I disconnected what I do with my self-worth. Because if you think about it, just because I maybe don't achieve the lofty standards I set myself, that doesn't mean I'm a worthless human being, does it? It absolutely doesn't. So I think when you start to disconnect your self-worth from what you actually do as a person, your behaviours, your actions and your goals, then all of a sudden the whole perfectionist mindset starts to crumble. Another thing that you can do to work through this perfectionist mindset is to take some time to really own and celebrate your successes and all of the things that are currently good about you. In other words, you want to practice gratitude. Hey, practicing gratitude is not just something that New Age hippies or yogi masters do. It's something that we should all be doing regularly, because the perfectionist mindset is very all or nothing. You either accomplish these super high standards and the world is okay, or you fall short, which is more often than not, and that means you're a terrible person and you're a worthless piece of crap and you've got nothing good to offer the world. I'm exaggerating, but when you start to dig into it, it does kind of feel a little bit like this. But when you practice gratitude on a regular basis, you start to connect with all of the things that are amazing right now before you even go after your goals. And this just creates a much stronger psychological foundation. So when things maybe don't quite go the way that you planned or in accordance with your high standards, you have a lot of other things that you're already connected with that are good about you. So practice gratitude. Ultimately, this is an amazing solution to the perfectionist mindset. So that's type number one. The second type of imposter's experience is the Superman or Superwoman. So this is to do with the type of person who feels like they need to overcompensate their perceived inadequacies by working harder and harder and harder. So this is kind of like your unhealthy workaholics. Now, just to clarify, working hard is of course not a bad thing. To achieve any goal in life, unless we are exceptionally lucky or we are handed it on a silver platter, we need to work hard. This is a good habit to have, of course. And also, if you love what you do, then you can still be a bit of a workaholic, but in a very positive way. But where it becomes a problem is when we use that extra work to cover up some kind of perceived inadequacy. One of the things I've mentioned on a previous podcast episode is that when I started doing presentations and live face-to-face workshops, I was recovering from a phobia of public speaking, something that I managed to get when I was back in high school. But also what was going on for me, just to reveal an extra layer, was I had this deep-seated belief that I simply wasn't good enough. And I think this is very common in a lot of people, this nagging feeling that somehow you're fundamentally inadequate as a person. Now, I don't have that anymore. I've done a lot of therapy. I've gone through a lot of processes that have been a massive help to me. But at the time, it was a massive issue. And this seemed to go into overdrive whenever I was asked to do a presentation or talk publicly. And my way around it was to prepare and prepare and prepare and rehearse until basically my voice hurted and I was utterly exhausted before I even got to the presentation. And I thought my belief system was that if I just worked harder and prepared harder than anyone else, then I would be okay. People wouldn't see those flaws. And in some way, that would make me better. It would make me good enough to be accepted. But at the end of the day, it was just masking over the feeling that I was going to be found out as a fraud if I made a mistake or if I forgot something or if I didn't reach the standards that I set myself. So then I did some therapeutic work on this issue and the difference was colossal. So if you're interested, I used a thing called timeline therapy from NLP, that's neuro-linguistic programming, and the problem just literally disappeared. It was quite amazing. But one of the big behavioural changes that I noticed was that all of a sudden I didn't really feel like I had to prepare every word of a presentation. I didn't have to rehearse anywhere near as much. I still prepared. I still did a little bit of rehearsal, but I was so much more comfortable with a loose guideline. Ultimately, I didn't feel like I had to work so damn hard just to cover up some deep-seated fear, because that fear had all but gone. So if you feel like you're overworking yourself because you're afraid something bad might happen and that means something even worse, then it's worth just taking a pause and looking a little bit deeper. So in terms of solutions, of course, therapy is always a good option for these things. If you want to check out timeline therapy using NLP, then that's well worth checking out. But what you can do in terms of a little behavioural change is do an audit on the work that you currently do. Make a list of all the tasks that you do in your job or whatever it is that you're working on, and then ask yourself, are all of these tasks really necessary, or are you just doing them to cover up some kind of fear that you have? And on that, it's really worth taking a look beyond the work and exploring the reasons why you're doing all of that extra work. Why are you staying that extra hour if you do so? Why are you working yourself to the bone or working weekends? What purpose is that serving? Now, if it is serving a positive purpose, then sure, that's fine, that's okay, you've still got to watch yourself. But if the answer that comes back is that it's not really serving much purpose at all, other than to fuel some sort of emotional need, then you might want to cut that back or potentially remove it from your schedule completely. So another little tip is to practice improvisation. Now, you don't have to join an improv group unless you want to, and it is a very good idea nonetheless, but you want to just become more comfortable not knowing what's about to happen in general, but still being able to improvise and make some good out of the situation on the spot. You want to learn to be a little bit more reactive. Now, I'm not suggesting that you abandon planning and preparing for things. Of course, you still want to do that, but you don't want to be so reliant on those plans. Anytime we try to make the world conform to our specific detailed preparations, the world tends to push back a little bit, because at the end of the day, life is organic. We can never completely predict anything, and attempting to do so is often something that we do from this Superman or this Superwoman mindset. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the magicians Siegfried and Roy. So they were magicians who used to perform in Las Vegas for a number of years. And they used to do all manner of, crazy stuff, especially with tigers. So they would perform tricks where they would stick their heads in the tiger's mouth and other bizarre things like that. And then one day, the tiger went a bit mental. Well, the tiger didn't go a bit mental, it just did what tigers regularly do, and bit Roy, carried him off the stage, and he suffered a career-ending injury. Now, the official party line was that the tiger was actually protecting Roy because she believed that he was her cub, but most people looked on and recognised that they were attempting to control something entirely that couldn't be entirely controlled. And this is what happens when we try to control every aspect of our life and we try to make the world conform to our very detailed plans. The world will push back because life is organic. So you don't want to attempt to control everything in your environment. So when you become more comfortable with improvisation, just allowing experience to happen and then trusting your ability to improvise and make things happen on the spot, then just frees you up from this obsessive need of trying to control your environment. It's another little tip you can add in there. Are you someone who struggles with work-life balance? You find it difficult to maintain harmony between career ambitions and your personal well-being. You're doing your best to balance demands and deadlines with the other important aspects of your life, but things like burnout, stress, and a nagging sense of guilt seem to forever lurk in the background. Well, one of the very best first steps that you can do to create create more balance is to do a full life audit. This is a powerful process that helps you highlight areas of your life that are a little bit out of sync and need to be addressed so that you can return to a more harmonious place. So if you want to do a life audit, then I have a free PDF that will take you through the entire thing. To get access to that, please check the show notes. You'll see a link and all the information you need. So that's type number 2. Imposters experience type number 3 is the natural genius. So this is where someone believes that their intelligence, their abilities, their skills, their personality are inherent and not something that they can improve, shift, cultivate and develop over time through their efforts. So I don't know if you've heard of the book Mindset by Carol Dweck. Again, it's another good recommendation, well worth checking out. And in the book, she talks about the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. So a fixed mindset is someone who believes that their abilities, their intelligence, their talents are all fixed, that they're only given a certain amount at birth and that's it. They can't improve those through work and through efforts and, of course, good teaching. Whereas a growth mindset is someone who believes the opposite. They believe that all of those qualities are up for grabs. They are all moving pictures and can be influenced through effort, through work, and good teaching. So with the natural genius, they are, as I'm sure you've guessed, operating from a fixed mindset. So kind of like the perfectionists, they also have high standards, but they expect to just be able to do things quickly because, hey, they're a natural genius at the end of the day. So the kicker is when they're not able to do something quickly and fluently right from the start, they totally freak out. They don't know how to deal with it. So in our book Mindsets, Carol Dweck talks about this in relation to kids. So the kids, what she found was that were labelled gifted, they often don't go on to actualise their potential. Because when they hit a roadblock, when they encountered something they struggled with, they couldn't handle it. They concluded that they'd reached the limit of their abilities. Whereas the kids who had a growth mindset were maybe slow starters, but they worked at getting better slowly over a significant period of time. So they actually ended up in the long run being much more successful, much more skilled than those with a fixed mindset. It's like that old fable that we tell kids, the tortoise and the hare. I used to love that story when I was growing up, that the tortoise and the hare decide to race each other. And of course, the hare is super arrogant. You know, he believes in his inherent advantages when it comes to speed. So he goes off like a shot when the starting gun fires. But eventually he becomes so comfortable with his inherent speed advantages that he gets lazy and he goes for a little sleep. The arrogance, just takes over. But of course, the tortoise has a very different mindset. It believes that slow and steady will always win the race. And of course, we all know the end to that story. So in terms of a solution for this, you want to be doing whatever you can to adopt a growth mindset. You want to analyse anything that you believe to be fixed and look at it as something that can be shifted, that can be developed, cultivated and improved over time, whether it be your intelligence, your skills, your abilities, aspects of your personality. These are things that we can shift, we can change through effort, through coaching, and of course, potentially through good teaching. So that's type number 3. Type number 4 is the soloist. So these are to do with people who refuse assistance because they think it will expose their inadequacies. And again, it's good to be independent, but if you're doing this because you're afraid of what people might think, then that's when it becomes a bit of a problem. I like to call this the myth of the lone warrior, and you see this quite a lot in the self-help industry. A lot of traditional self-help can be pretty macho, pretty alpha. It proliferates the idea that one person can conquer everything. I think one of the perfect examples of this is motivational and self-help guru Tony Robbins. If you don't know who Tony Robbins is, do a quick Google search and you'll see a tall guy with dark hair and massive teeth talking about personal empowerment. So Tony's great, of course. He has some fantastic tools and techniques and ideas, but his personal story that he pummels in time and time again is all about him going from nothing, being overweight and unhealthy and unhappy, to becoming a wealthy, successful guy who positively impacts the lives of millions. But the truth is, if you peer behind the curtain, the big achievements that he's created, they're created by teams of people. Now, he's obviously a leader within that team, but these massive transformations, these huge successes, are never created by just a single person. You need a leader, but no one can accomplish anything of note by themselves. We need other people. So the soloist tends to refuse this because they don't want other people opening up their Pandora's box. They don't want people seeing their crap. So they just refuse help and just attempt to do it all by themselves. So in terms of a solution for this, you've just got to realise that there's no shame in asking for help. And if you want to make your life easier, and if you do want to be more successful, then you need good people around about you. Don't be a lone warrior, get assistance. And you can introduce this incrementally. You don't have to let everyone see all of the stuff that's going on for you at the one time. You can just pick someone who you really trust, and you can let them know a little bit about what you do. You can ask for assistance in a very small way. You don't have to think about this as an all or nothing thing. You know, you can do this incrementally, but the first step is just very simply asking for assistance, asking for help. So that's type number 4. The fifth and final type of the imposter's experience is the expert. So the expert is someone who measures their competence based on what and how much they know. So they believe that they will never know enough, and often they have to have an enormous amount of knowledge on a subject before they even begin. And this often leads to a crippling sense of procrastination. They never get started. So I see this a lot in my industry, which is the self-help and also the coaching industry. So some aspiring coaches believe that they have to be the ultimate experts before they even work with a single client. And if they're not, then the client is clearly going to suss them out, laugh at their face, and call them a fraud. So they end up just collecting course after course after course, certificate after certificate, and they never quite feel like they're good enough to sometimes even get started. And again, I want to be clear here. Continual education is great. You know, I still go on several courses a year because I do want to increase my knowledge and increase my abilities. But you don't want to be doing that just to cover up a deep feeling of inadequacy. So it's more to do with the reasons why you're accumulating all of this knowledge. And in terms of a solution moving forward, you want to shift your attention from knowledge to experience. Become a doer, or at the very least become more of a doer. Someone who takes action and learns from experience rather than someone who just collects knowledge for the sake of it. And you can start off small, again, doing small incremental things first and then building up from there. So I've recently been introduced to a concept called imperfect action. So this is the idea that you want to train yourself to take action before you feel ready. And I absolutely love this because the real learning in life, let's be honest here, comes from experience. Books, courses, information, all of those things support learning, and we need to do those, of course. But what seals the deal is when you get out there and you turn that theory, that information, that knowledge into action and experience. To loop back to the self-help guru, Tony Robbins, he has a great quote where he says that knowledge isn't power, it's only potential power. The real power comes when you turn that knowledge into action. So become more of a doer. Take action before you're ready. And do it in steps at first, then get more ambitious over time. Also, another point I want to add in is that gathering more information can sometimes make this form of imposter's experience even worse, especially if you're just gathering information for the sake of gathering information. So as another solution, you can have a think about what's the gap between what you know and what you can do, and then work at shortening that gap. For example, if you know tons of information about underwater basket weaving, I don't know if that's a thing, but maybe I'm doing that industry a disservice, but you've never actually woven a basket underwater, then something's not right. You need to shorten that gap. And this is the same for any skill or ability. So there we have it, the 5 different types of imposters experience according to Dr. Valerie Young. So I just want to finish off this episode of the podcast by sharing a quote from the Tiny Buddha founder. It's a website if you want to check it out, Laura Deshane. And she says, never hold yourself back from trying something new just because you're afraid you won't be good enough. You'll never get the opportunity to do your best work if you're not willing to first do your worst and then let yourself learn and grow. A big shout out to Laurie. And I think that's a good place to bring this episode to a close. If you enjoyed this, then I would love it if you could subscribe or follow wherever you listen to your podcast. It really does help get the word out. So thank you once again for listening to this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.